I bought my dream home with a private pond, no neighbors, and total peace. Or so I thought. One weekend, a deranged woman stormed onto my land claiming I'd stolen it. What followed was a descent into madness, sabotage, and a truth darker than I ever imagined. I've always had a very specific picture in my head of what peace looks like. Not the kind you get from a meditation app or a weekend getaway, but real, tangible, gut-level peace. For me, it was always tied to nature. Quiet mornings, fog hanging over a small private pond, the kind of silence so thick you can hear the frogs clear their throats. I used to doodle it in my sketchbooks back in college while everyone else was drawing skyscrapers or minimalist concrete cubes. They wanted the city. I wanted the damn trees. It took me almost 15 years, a career in freelance architecture and a failed engagement to finally get to the point where I could afford what I wanted. A modest, standalone home, away from the suburbs, no neighbors peeking over the fence. When the listing for the pondside property appeared, I practically choked on my coffee. 2 acres. A pond that sparkled in satellite view like a sapphire dropped in green velvet. A decent-looking house, nothing fancy but solid bones, and the price. Well, it was suspiciously low. Naturally, I assumed it was a scam or some kind of nightmare foreclosure. But I checked the listing twice, then 5 times, called the realtor. She spoke fast like someone trying to sell a used car on fire. "The seller's just very motivated," she said. "Wants to relocate out of state. Quick closing, no strings." It practically screamed red flag. So I brought in a real estate attorney I trust, old friend from college who once saved my ass during a zoning battle, and had him comb through every inch of paperwork. Titles, deeds, easements, property surveys, even county zoning records from 20 years ago. He didn't find a single thing wrong, so like any emotionally unstable adult with too much optimism and a dream to chase, I went for it. I paid in full, below market value, and signed faster than my hand could write. 1 week later, I was driving up the long gravel driveway with a box of coffee mugs and a Bluetooth speaker like I was moving into heaven itself. The first few days were, for lack of a better word, bliss. Mornings were filled with coffee and birdsong. The evenings, just the sound of bullfrogs and the occasional owl pretending to be more mysterious than it really was. I set up my drafting desk in front of a huge bay window that overlooked the pond. Even started sketching again, which I hadn't done for years. I spent afternoons tearing out old shag carpet and wallpaper that smelled like mothballs and broken marriages. Manual labor has always calmed my brain. No emails, no clients. No one yelling at me about their Pinterest board dreams. No one at all, actually. There were no nearby neighbors, not one house in view. The woods were thick and the driveway was long and uninviting. Just how I liked it. On the 7th evening, I was fixing up the back deck, ripping off warped boards, replacing rusted screws, when I heard something that didn't fit into my catalog of peaceful nature sounds. Human shouting. Female, angry, echoing up from the tree line near the pond. At first, I thought it might have been someone walking a dog on a nearby trail, maybe yelling at a runaway golden retriever. But the voice got closer. Fast. Then, without warning, a woman pushed through the brush like a horror movie extra. Gray tangled hair, oversized windbreaker, and eyes so wide I could see the whites from 20 feet away. She was breathing hard like she'd run all the way from hell. "You need to get out of here," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is my land. He had no right to sell it, no right." I didn't say anything at first, not because I was scared, but because I genuinely couldn't tell if this was real life or some prank. She kept talking, or ranting, really. Something about betrayal, about that bastard and what he did to me and how I would regret staying here. She didn't come all the way onto the deck but hovered right at the edge of the clearing like she was daring me to challenge her. I stayed calm. Not my first crazy encounter. Architecture clients sometimes snap when you tell them their dream cantilevered glass tub can't be built on sand. I told her politely but firmly that I was the new owner of the property, showed no signs of aggression, and said if she didn't leave, I'd have to call the sheriff. She laughed, not a nervous laugh, the kind of laugh that makes your spine itch. Then she turned and walked back into the woods like it was just a normal Tuesday. After she disappeared, I stood there for a full minute, hammer still in hand, wondering what the hell had just happened. Then I did what any rational person would do. I went inside, locked the doors, and called the sheriff's non-emergency line. They sent someone over within 40 minutes. Deputy looked bored before I even finished telling the story. "Probably some local who doesn't like the sale," he said, tapping his notepad like it offended him to have to write anything down. "People get sentimental about land out here, especially if it's been in a family." "She said it was hers," I told him. "Well, not anymore, right? You've got your deed and paperwork? That's all that matters." He didn't ask for a description, didn't offer to look around, just gave me a card and told me to call if she came back. She would, but I didn't know that yet. That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was scared, but because that laugh echoed inside my head like some kind of warning I didn't understand yet. The kind of laugh that doesn't come from someone who just lost a piece of land. It came from someone who'd already lost something a whole lot bigger. The next morning I woke up to the sound of my motion sensor chime going off in the kitchen. It took me a moment to remember where I was, my new home, my pond, my peace, or what was left of it. I walked over to the window with a coffee cup still half full, hoping it was just a deer, maybe a raccoon, or hell, even a bear would have been preferable. But there was no animal, just the mailbox, or more accurately, what was left of the mailbox. The metal door had been ripped off and was lying in the gravel. The post had been bent backward like someone had taken a crowbar and lovingly introduced it to the laws of physics. The little red flag was missing entirely. At first I stood there in the doorway with my coffee cooling in my hand, trying to convince myself that this was just bad luck. Vandals, teens, a windstorm, anything but her. But denial doesn't last long when your mailbox looks like it got into a fight with a dump truck and lost. I reported the vandalism to the sheriff's office. Again, they were polite but uninterested. The deputy who showed up this time, a younger guy, maybe mid-20s, with a badge that looked like it still had the price tag on it, said, "Probably kids. This time of year they get bored." "She threatened me last night," I said flatly. "Said I'd regret staying here." He nodded slowly like I was reading him the back of a shampoo bottle. "You got cameras?" I didn't. Yet. That changed by lunchtime. I drove straight into town and spent more than I care to admit at a security store run by a man with an unfortunate soul patch and a deep passion for motion tracking. By sunset, I had 6 cameras installed, 2 covering the front gate, 2 aimed at the house, 1 watching the driveway, and 1 pointed right at the edge of the woods where she'd appeared. The next few days passed with no sign of her. It felt like a test, like she was watching to see how long it would take me to get comfortable again. So I didn't. I kept a hammer by the bed and a new knife in the kitchen. I stopped drinking after dark and started double-checking every lock. Then came the garbage. The first bag showed up on a Thursday morning, dumped near my front step, ripped open, full of half-rotten food and cigarette butts. I thought it might be an accident. Maybe a raccoon dragged it there. Maybe a truck lost a load. But the next day there were 2 bags, then 3. By Sunday, it was clear someone was dropping garbage on my porch deliberately, and not just trash, broken glass, moldy meat, dead flowers. It felt symbolic, like a hex from someone too angry to learn voodoo. I checked the footage. Around 3 a.m., the same figure stepped out of the trees, hunched and erratic, dragging a garbage bag like a serial killer in a bad slasher movie. She didn't look up, just walked up the steps, dropped the bag, and left, like a delivery from hell. I called the sheriff's office again. Same routine. "We'll make a note of it." I asked if I could file for a restraining order. They said I'd need a pattern of behavior, multiple incidents, official reports. I reminded them I'd now made 3. "Technically, she hasn't hurt you," they said. "I guess I'll wait until she lights the house on fire then?" The deputy didn't laugh. After the 3rd trash drop, I stopped calling. It was clear they weren't going to do anything unless I showed up in a hospital gown. Instead, I started collecting the evidence myself. Every video clip went into a neatly labeled folder. I backed it up twice, once to the cloud, once to an encrypted hard drive. I printed photos, highlighted timestamps, even made a little spreadsheet because apparently I'm the kind of guy who builds Excel files to track crazy women invading his property. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. I decided to take it a step further. I called an old client of mine, a guy named Wes who used to run a cybersecurity startup before cashing out and becoming a private investigator. He owed me a favor for a lake house I redesigned for his divorce. "Tell me everything you know about Doreen Satterfield," I said. He whistled low. "Damn, that name again?" "Again? She used to be the HOA president out near your neck of the woods. That woman was infamous." I booked him, told him I wanted a full background check, anything he could dig up. Arrests, court records, mental evaluations, whatever was public or almost public. While Wes got to work, Doreen escalated. She stopped delivering trash and started showing up in person again. First, standing in the clearing between my house and the pond, just staring. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for an hour. I watched her from my office window. She never spoke, never moved much, just stood there like a broken statue of suburban wrath. One afternoon, I walked outside and asked her calmly to leave. She looked at me and said, "You can try to pretend you own this place, but the pond remembers. It remembers what you stole." Then she turned and walked away barefoot, disappearing into the trees. That night, she came back and set up a tent, right on my lawn, near the pond. She wasn't hiding anymore. I called the sheriff. Again, they showed up, and here's the twist. She told them I was her tenant, that I had refused to pay rent and kicked her out of the main house. The deputy looked at me like I was the one who'd gone insane. I had to walk him through the deed, the purchase, the dates, even show him photos of the empty house when I moved in. Only after 30 minutes of back and forth did he tell her to leave or face trespassing charges. She left and returned the next morning. Same tent, same silent stare, same insane righteousness. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't obsession. It wasn't some lonely old lady losing her grip. This was revenge, and I was just getting started as her target. Wes called me 3 days later, and his first words were, "Dude, what the hell did you buy?" That's never what you want to hear from a private investigator. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and paperwork when he said it. The camera feeds were playing silently on my laptop next to me, and in the corner of one screen, Doreen was just sitting in her tent, staring out at the pond like she was meditating, like she belonged there. I muttered something about regret and caffeine addiction and asked him to tell me everything. He started with the basics. Doreen Satterfield had been the president of the local HOA about 10 years ago. Technically, my property never belonged to the HOA, but the association had once tried to annex it, unsuccessfully. The owner at the time, a guy named Patrick Langley, had fought them off in court. That's where the war started. She was obsessed, Wes said. Filed complaints, started rumors, even showed up to county zoning meetings claiming the property was a fire hazard, an environmental threat, you name it. But Patrick held out, didn't give in. She hated him for it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. So what happened to him? Wes hesitated. He cracked. There was a fire. Not major, just some damage to a tool shed, but it rattled him. After that, he sold the place in a panic and moved out of state. I blinked. Wait. He sold it? No. That's the thing. Wes cleared his throat. He didn't sell it willingly. He filed a petition with the county court to approve the sale through a conservatorship. He claimed he was under psychological duress. From Doreen. I didn't say anything. The back of my neck started to prickle. She was eventually arrested, Wes continued. Fraud, harassment, trespassing. But the charges didn't stick. She was declared mentally unstable, committed for a while. No jail time, eventually released. No official contact with the HOA since then, but she never really left, I finished for him. Right, she just drifted. The HOA washed their hands of her like a bad chapter in a newsletter. But no one really talked about it, especially since Langley disappeared off the grid. I stood up and walked to the window. Doreen was gone, tent still there. But she was gone. I turned back to the call. Is there any record of her owning this land? No, never. But that doesn't matter to someone who thinks they were entitled to it. You ever heard of a delusional disorder called erotomania? This is like that, but with land. It's not love, it's possession. She believes the land is hers because she wanted it more than anyone else. And because Patrick beat her in court, that made it personal. I felt sick, not because of the history, but because it suddenly explained everything. The trash, the mailbox, the muttered threats, the pond. Did she ever live near here? I asked. That's the creepiest part, Wes said. She bought the property directly adjacent to yours about a year ago. 1 acre, small, overgrown, technically not suitable for building, but she lives there. No house, just a shack, no power, no running water. I pressed my fingers to my temples. So she moved next to the house she lost just to stare at it? Apparently. That night I sat in my living room with the lights off, watching the cameras. The moon lit up the pond like a dead eye, and the tent on the far side of the yard looked like a tumor. And then it hit me. I remembered that the utility room had a crawl space. During repairs, I hadn't looked closely. It was blocked by an old wardrobe I'd shoved against the wall to make room for painting. Something about Wes's mention of Patrick Langley's breakdown made me feel unfinished. Like the story wasn't done being told. I went down to the crawl space with a flashlight and moved the wardrobe. Behind it, the old access panel was slightly ajar, like someone had pulled it open in a hurry. Inside, it was dry but smelled faintly of mildew and dust. I crawled in, brushing cobwebs from my face, and found an old wooden box shoved into the far corner. Not hidden, just abandoned. Inside the box were 2 things, a leather-bound notebook and a dusty handheld recorder, the kind that ran on AA batteries and recorded with the emotional sensitivity of a toaster. I took both upstairs. The first page of the notebook had a name, Patrick Langley, and the next line scrawled in anxious block letters. If you're reading this, she's not done with the house. I sat down, and I read. The entries were unsteady, panicked. He described hearing noises outside at night, footsteps on the gravel, dead animals left near the pond. He wrote about legal threats from the HOA that had no basis in reality, forged letters demanding he submit architectural drawings for renovations he hadn't made. Then it got darker. He wrote about Doreen following him into town, calling his family, telling people he was a threat to the community. There was one line that made me drop the notebook. She says the pond is hers, that it listens to her, that I poisoned it by living here. I played the first tape. Patrick's voice was raspy, like he hadn't slept in days. "She's out there again," he said. "Second night in a row, just staring. I tried to call the sheriff, but they won't do anything. They say she's just walking. I think she's trying to wear me down." Another entry. "She left something in the basement. I found it. I threw it in the pond. Maybe that was a mistake. Now she just stands there whispering. The pond feels wrong." I stopped the tape, walked outside. The air felt heavier. I looked at the pond. It rippled once. No wind. And I realized then, maybe Patrick hadn't been crazy. Maybe this land was cursed, not by ghosts, but by memory. The silence didn't return after that night. Not really. Oh sure, the woods still made their little rustling noises, the frogs still croaked their nightly songs, but something had shifted. I could feel it in my bones the way dogs feel earthquakes before they hit. The air around the pond had changed. Not just the tension, something deeper, like it wasn't just haunted by memory anymore, it was being used. Doreen disappeared for a few days. No tent, no trash, no broken mailbox pieces. I knew better than to think she'd left for good. But I allowed myself to breathe a little. I even invited friends over, a couple from Austin, the ones who always joked that I was slowly becoming a cabin-dwelling cryptid. I needed something normal, human contact, beer, sarcastic banter. It went well for the first hour. The grill was fired up, the steaks were almost done, the playlist was humming, and I was even starting to joke about the madness like it was a weird backwoods sitcom. Then Krista, the wife, wrinkled her nose and asked, "What's that smell?" We all paused. I didn't notice anything at first, but then the wind shifted. It wasn't sewage, wasn't rot exactly. It was chemical, something sharp and artificial like fertilizer mixed with chlorine. I followed the scent to the edge of the pond where the water was still and unusually cloudy. The closer I got, the more pungent it became. And then I saw them, 3 fish, belly up near the surface. Dead. I stared for a full minute before saying a word. Then I made a quiet excuse and grabbed a mason jar from the kitchen. I collected a water sample and sealed it tight. My friends left early, politely, but I could feel their unease. This wasn't charmingly eccentric anymore. It was starting to feel dangerous. I drove the sample to a private water testing facility the next day down in San Marcos. Paid extra for a rush job. The results came back 48 hours later. Elevated levels of glyphosate, traces of paraquat, herbicides, not just your average Home Depot weed killer. Industrial-grade crap. That's been banned in half the country. Stuff that, in the right concentrations, can ruin entire ecosystems or kill something a lot bigger than fish. I knew it. I knew it. I checked the camera footage, and there she was, 3 nights ago, slipping out of the woods, crouching at the water's edge. She poured something out of a white plastic container. Then she just sat by the water for an hour, humming. Not a song, just humming. I called the sheriff. Again. They said, "We'll log it." I sent them the footage, the test results. They said, "Unless you catch her in the act, it's circumstantial. We can't prove intent." Intent? She's poisoning my pond like she's seasoning a steak, and they want intent? That's when I called my lawyer. A sharp bastard named Colson who wears cowboy boots to court and once told a judge to stop acting like a lawn chair. I sent him everything. Videos, the water report, the journal entries, even the tapes. He told me to start prepping a civil suit, environmental harm, trespassing, harassment, possible attempted poisoning if we could prove she'd targeted me. Meanwhile, I kept digging. I checked every inch of the property looking for signs of tampering. That's when I noticed the patch of disturbed soil near the back fence. It hadn't been there 2 days ago. I brought out a shovel. What I found were 3 half-empty bottles of agricultural-grade herbicide, sealed in zip bags and buried shallow. Probably to hide the evidence, or maybe to leach into the soil slowly. That night I found her on the footage again. This time she crept right up to my back door. Tried the handle, found it locked. Then she looked into the camera and smiled. I don't know what scared me more, the fact that she smiled or the fact that she looked completely at peace while doing it. Not angry, not deranged. Peaceful. Like she believed everything was unfolding exactly as it should. A day later, she returned in broad daylight, stood by the pond again, arms folded, looking proud. I stepped outside, phone in hand, already dialing the sheriff. She didn't run. Instead, she said, "It won't let you keep it. You can pour all the clean water you want into it, but it remembers." I asked her as calmly as I could what she meant. She didn't answer, just turned and walked to the edge of the woods and vanished. I watched the cameras obsessively that night. Every flicker of motion made my jaw tighten. Around 2 in the morning, the alert buzzed on my phone again. Doreen was in the kitchen, or trying to be. She was pushing on the window frame, checking the latches, holding something in her hand, couldn't tell what. I shouted through the mic system I'd installed earlier that week, and she ran. I checked the door, still locked. The next morning, I found the trash can lid ajar and a plastic bag next to it. Inside was a sealed Tupperware container with half a sandwich in it, turkey and cheese. My kind of sandwich. There was powder sprinkled inside. I didn't even hesitate. I wore gloves, bagged it, and drove it straight to the lab, still waiting on results. I'd reached my limit. My lawyer filed the civil suit. Emergency injunction, harassment, and environmental contamination. We were pushing for an immediate restraining order. The problem was, Doreen vanished again. No tent, no shack, nothing on her property next door. It was like she dissolved into the forest. But I knew better. She was planning something. And I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was in a war. It's weird how your sense of time changes when you're living in fear. Days stretch like rubber bands. Nights collapse into blink and its morning fragments. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept more than 3 hours in a row. The sandwich came back from the lab. Rat poison. Not enough to kill a horse, but enough to mess someone up if they were already sick or old or just unlucky. That was the final straw for Colson, my lawyer. He fast-tracked the restraining order through a judge who owed him a favor from some long-forgotten golf course lawsuit. We got a signed order within 24 hours. It was supposed to be over, except Doreen had vanished. No sign of her on my property. No motion alerts. Nothing from her shack next door, just silence and pine trees. I still didn't sleep. Colson told me to leave town for a few days while the court processed the next phase of our suit. "Clear your head," he said. "Let the cops do their job for once." So I drove to Dallas, spent 2 nights in a soulless hotel room watching bad cable and refreshing my security cam feeds like I was checking stock prices. Nothing, just wind and squirrels. On the 3rd night, around 11:30, I got the alert. Fire. The smoke alarm in the back of the house triggered first. Then the camera outside the mudroom went black. Then the feed from the pondside deck began to flicker, glowing red in the corners. I called 911 before I was even fully dressed. Told them my house was burning down. Told them someone had set it. The drive back was a blur. 3 hours of sheer adrenaline, cursing at slow trucks and watching the road twitch in the dark. I didn't even stop for gas. By the time I got there, the fire was mostly out. The firefighters had contained it before it reached the main structure, but the back patio was scorched. Part of the siding peeled like sunburned skin. Smoke curled out of a blown-out window near the utility room. I stood in the gravel, hands shaking, and stared at my house. It didn't feel like mine anymore. The fire marshal met me with a clipboard and a squint. "Accelerant used," he said. "Smelled like gasoline. Entry point was the back mudroom. Somebody lit it and ran." "Cameras?" I asked. He nodded. "Cops are reviewing footage now." I checked myself. Doreen. It had to be. And it was. The sheriff showed me the footage on a cracked tablet. The timestamp was clear, 10:56 p.m. She walked up the gravel path with a red gas can in one hand and something like a flare in the other. Hood over her head. Calm. Methodical. She poured, lit, watched. Walked away as the flames bloomed behind her like some twisted 4th of July show. They found her less than an hour later, inside the old HOA office building 2 miles away. It had been condemned for years, windows boarded up, power long since cut. But inside, she'd built a little nest of papers and candle stubs. Maps of the neighborhood, copies of bylaws, a corkboard with photos of my house, of me soon. She was muttering something when they arrested her. The deputy on the scene said she kept saying, "He poisoned the land, he ruined the water, he ruined my order." And then she started laughing. They took her in on charges of arson, attempted murder, and violation of a court order. Her public defender immediately requested a psychiatric evaluation, fine by me. Let her rot in a padded room. But that wasn't the end. A week later, Colson called me with something strange. "You're not gonna like this," he said, always a great opener. "What?" "The gas can she used, traced back to a purchase under the name Michael Campbell." I frowned. "Who the hell is that?" "Former HOA legal counsel, back when Doreen ran the place." That made my stomach drop. I told him to dig deeper. It didn't take long. Michael Campbell had been quietly disbarred 4 years ago for ethics violations. Nothing dramatic, just a slow erosion of trust, a few sketchy real estate transfers, some mishandled funds. He'd faded into obscurity, but apparently he'd never stopped meddling. 2 weeks before the fire, he'd filed a motion at the county recorder's office requesting reactivation of the HOA jurisdiction over the area, including my property. It was denied, but the timing was perfect. Too perfect. Wes, my PI, found messages, emails. Campbell and Doreen had been in contact for months. He was encouraging her, pushing her, probably promising her that once she cleaned things up, she'd get her title back. They wanted the HOA reborn, with her as its queen. I stared at the screenshots of their emails. One line stuck with me, written by Campbell. "He won't last. The land remembers who ruled it." This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was a coup. And I'd been in the crosshairs since day one. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be, not physically, just sterile. Like even the walls didn't want to be involved in this mess. I sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore, feeling like a man trying to make a legal argument for why a tornado shouldn't keep hitting his house. Colson was next to me, calm as ever, flipping through his notes like he was waiting for a dentist appointment. Across the aisle sat Doreen, in a beige institutional outfit, wrists unshackled but watched closely by 2 deputies. Her hair had been combed, her eyes had not. And behind her, in a navy blazer that still reeked of smugness despite its age, was Michael Campbell. He looked like a man who still thought he was on the board of something. The charges were stacked high. arson, trespassing, attempted poisoning, repeated violation of a court order. And that was just for Doreen. Campbell's name came later: conspiracy, incitement, and the illegal attempt to reinstate HOA jurisdiction without due process. The first few days felt like a slow exorcism of truth. Witness after witness came up. The water specialist from San Marcos explained the toxicity levels. The fire marshal described the accelerant. The sheriff's deputy confirmed Doreen's previous incidents: the cameras, the campsite, the garbage, the poisoning attempts. I watched jurors flinch when we showed the sandwich footage. But it was the journal that changed everything. I brought it in sealed. The judge, after review, allowed it as contextual evidence. Patrick Langley's words, read aloud by Colson in that hushed, careful tone only lawyers can manage, hit harder than anything I'd expected. Especially the part where Patrick wrote, "She doesn't want the house. She wants the land to remember her name. She said she'd erase me from it." And then we played the tape. That brittle voice, the fear in it, the sense that something was closing in. You could feel the oxygen leave the room when he said, "I think she's trying to wear me down." The jury listened. Then Colson brought out the emails. He showed how Campbell had advised her, even coached her. How he used phrases like retake authority and squatter mentality. How he tried to refile jurisdictional maps in secret, banking on the idea that no one would notice until it was too late. He framed it as a last gasp attempt to restore control. A failed HOA kingdom trying to crown its queen again through fire and madness. The defense didn't argue innocence. They argued insanity. Doreen had been diagnosed with a complex delusional disorder. Her attorney painted a picture of a woman abandoned by her community, driven mad by loss and betrayal. I almost felt bad, until I remembered the fish, the chemicals, the fact that I'd eaten half of that sandwich before noticing the powder. No. Sympathy has a shelf life. In the end, the jury came back with 2 words I'd been waiting months to hear. Guilty. Committed. Doreen was declared criminally insane. The judge ordered her confined to a high-security psychiatric facility for life. No parole, no release. Campbell didn't get off so easily. The court found him guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, incitement to arson, and impersonation of legal authority. He got 5 years federal, disbarred permanently, and the judge ordered a separate civil hearing for restitution. And me? I was awarded $250,000 to in damages. Enough to fix the house, enough to cleanse the land, maybe even enough to sleep again. Reporters started calling after that. Local news first, then regional, then some guy from a podcast who wanted to do a 10-part series on HOA cults and suburban warfare. I declined. It wasn't a story to me. It was survival. And even now, when I walk outside and look at the pond, I still half expect to see her standing there. Just a ripple in the trees, watching. But she's gone. And this time, it's not a pause. It's over. 6 months later, my mailbox still leans a little to the left. I've replaced it 3 times, but the gravel under it just won't settle right. Some neighbors might take that as a sign to pour new concrete. I've chosen to see it as a reminder that perfection is fragile, and sometimes a little crooked is exactly how life means to be. The house is whole again. New siding, fresh deck, reinforced doors, and security cameras that now ping to 3 separate devices. The pond has been treated, flushed, tested, and cleared by 2 environmental labs. The fish are back. I named one of them Colson because he keeps swimming in circles like he's looking for someone to sue. I still don't have neighbors. Not really. The shack Doreen used to live in was seized and demolished by the county. The HOA she once led was officially dissolved, its board disbanded, and its remaining funds, barely $5,000, transferred to a local library project. I donated another 10,000 from my settlement to the same cause. Felt poetic. They asked if I'd consider running a new community council. I politely told them I'd rather mud wrestle a raccoon. There's a scar on one of the trees near the pond, a blackened patch from the fire that won't grow moss. Every time I walk past it, I pause. Not because I'm haunted, because I won. Not in the Hollywood way where everything explodes and someone rides off on a motorcycle, but in the quiet way. The land is mine now, not just on paper, but in memory, in sweat, in scars, in everything I protected when no one else would step in. Sometimes I sit out there with a beer and talk to Patrick Langley's old recorder. I press play on his last entry and I let it run. Then I say, "She's gone, Pat. I handled it." And maybe it's crazy, or maybe it's closure. 2 weeks ago, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Doreen, much younger, standing beside the pond with a clipboard in hand and a triumphant grin on her face. On the back, written in faded ink, "Some rulers never give up their thrones." No fingerprints, no leads, just that. I burned it, not out of fear, out of finality, and then I finally started building the thing I'd put off for months, a gazebo right by the water's edge. Took me a week, cedar wood, clean lines, no HOA to tell me I couldn't. When it was done, I threw a party, invited every friend who ever asked, "Hey, how's the swamp cult going?" We grilled, we laughed, we toasted. We watched the sun drop below the trees like a curtain falling on a play that ran far too long. And when I raised my glass, I didn't say anything dramatic. Just one word. Mine.